So I have one beer, turns into another beer. Within a little bit of time, I have some cocaine in my hand. Then I'm going next door to my friend's house, and I'm huffing ether and taking some other prescription drugs. And I just realized it was one of those things when I started, I just couldn't stop. My name is Josh Harris. Hear my story. So I grew up in a mixed faith household with two incredibly loving parents of Judaism and Christianity. My dad's Jewish and my mom was Christian. So I was actually raised going to temple till I was about 9 years old. And it was a beautiful experience until I was about 9.5, and my parents split up. And that's when my faith began to fall by the wayside. Really, my higher power at that time became seeking the approval of other people. So when I was 13 years old, I discovered my 3 main addictions: drinking, drugs, and an addiction in the sexual area. And for me, they really started to warp my perspective at a young age, but unfortunately the worst part about it is they started to rob me of my potential. And it just began a downward spiral that unfortunately would last about a decade. I remember the first time really getting drunk, I just felt like this changes everything. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged, I was good enough. I had this incredible connection with the world and people around me. It just was filling that God-sized hole I was looking for. The only problem was it wore off, But I remember the next day being in a grocery store with my friend and his family and contemplating how I could steal alcohol from the grocery store. So again, this really set off something inside me that I couldn't control. For me, one of the tragic parts was I would always try to stop so hard on my own accord. I would white knuckle it. I would maybe build up weeks. I think the most I actually was able to stop for 2 months with drinking and drugging. But the problem was when I started again, it was like I never stopped. So I remember one time I went to this party, and a little bit later into the party, I think, well, it wouldn't be normal if I didn't just have one beer, So I have one beer, turns into another beer. Within a little bit of time, I have some cocaine in my hand. Within probably 30 minutes to an hour later, that's gone. Then I'm going next door to my friend's house, and I'm huffing ether and taking some other prescription drugs. And I just realized it was one of those things when I started, I just couldn't stop, man. And it ended, this horrific binge ended a few days later with me stealing from my closest friends and having to leave this college out of shame. I remember the last drink I had, I was at a bar, and the cab driver ended up taking me to my mother's house because I think I was too drunk to tell him where I lived. So he ended up just taking me to the address on my license. And my mom was, I knocked on the door. My stepdad let me in, but my mom stopped me. It may have been 3 o'clock in the morning, and she was kind of like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, like, "Thou shalt not pass." And she just starts interrogating me, and I can't even speak. I'm too intoxicated. I remember coming to, and they're looking over me saying, "Should we take him to the hospital?" And the next day, she took away my car keys and just started dropping me off at 12-step meetings. Now, I tried 12-step programs before, but I never really worked the program. I just sort of showed up, sat in the back, but I didn't do any steps. I didn't get a sponsor, had no accountability. Well, I remember this time I actually showed up and asked the guy after a meeting, who was generous enough to, months before, ask me if I wanted to go rock climbing with him. Probably said, "No, I'm too cool for that." And but this time I remember that gesture of kindness, so I asked him, "Hey, will you sponsor me?" And he said, "Sure, man. Just call me every day and let's meet once a week." One of the first things he told me to do was hit my knees in the morning and night and say this beautiful prayer called the 3rd step prayer. And I started to do that. And, I'll say there's plenty more to the story, but ever since I started that discipline of hitting my knees and having a sponsor, I've not had to have a drink or drug, and it's been over 11 years. Bit by bit, I continue to progress and try to help other people. I got a little bit of sobriety time under my belt, and it became pretty clear, though, that there was another addiction that I had not dealt with. While the drugs and the alcohol, I had found freedom from that and was finding freedom, by through the grace of God, through the grace of 12-step recovery, through the grace of prayer, I really had not addressed another addiction, and that was the addiction in the sexual area. So someone who was sponsoring me at the time, mentor of mine, gave me a gentleman's number and said, I want you to call this man. And I did. And I remember calling this individual, and I spoke to him on the phone, and I told him a little bit about what I was dealing with. And I remember asking him at the end of this phone call, I just said, hey man, is there freedom from this? Because I thought this was so deeply ingrained in my genetics that there was just no way I was going to find freedom from this addiction. And I remember that man sharing on the phone with me, he said, yes, I'm glad I got that monkey off of my back. And it was as if the light of the Lord reached out through the phone and pierced my heart, and I knew that freedom was attainable. March 9th, 2010 is my sexual sobriety date, and August of 2008 is my sobriety date from drugs and alcohol. And it is such a better way of life. And I'll just say this, when I got sobriety from the drugs and the alcohol, I could see God working in my life in so many beautiful ways. When I got sexual sobriety and freedom and integrity, I could feel God working in my life in ways I could not fathom possible. If I could give my younger self some encouragement or a word of wisdom, I would say, don't sacrifice what you want most for what you want in the moment. Serve Jesus, serve others, and the rest of your life will make sense. And your worst day in sobriety will be infinitely more meaningful and better than your best day as an addict.